It was supposed to be a perfect day, a day where love felt invincible, where the bonds we shared would strengthen against the odds of time. I spent the entire day enveloped in a bittersweet kind of excitement, my heart racing as I set the table with his favorite dishes, arranged the flowers he'd once told me reminded him of my smile, and carefully picked out a dress that he'd said made my eyes sparkle. Friends and family had been calling all day, their warm voices bringing joy to the air as they reminded me of how lucky I was to have a man like him by my side. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the glow of the candles I had so meticulously placed began to fill the room, I found myself sitting alone at the table. He wasn't late. He wasn't coming at all. His voice, distant and cold, echoed in my ears. "I can't make it tonight," he said. "Something came up at work." Work. The word hit me harder than it should have, slicing through my carefully built optimism like a jagged blade. I forced a smile through the phone, my voice trembling. "It's our anniversary." "I know," he replied, his tone flat and devoid of guilt. "But this is important. I'll make it up to you." Make it up to me. As if the hours I had spent imagining his smile, his laughter, his presence at the table we shared could be exchanged for some later date, one more convenient for him. I swallowed my anger, refusing to let it slip through my voice. "All right," I whispered, even though it wasn't. When the call ended, the silence in the room felt deafening. I sat at the table for a moment longer, staring at the empty seat across from me, the flickering candlelight mocking the hope I had clung to all day. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest until it was almost impossible to breathe. I wanted to cry, but held back, fearing the tears would make it all too real. I put away the food, each clatter of a dish echoing in the quiet kitchen like a funeral bell for my expectations. The dress I had so carefully chosen now felt suffocating, and I tore it off in a rush, replacing it with an old sweater and leggings. My reflection in the mirror was almost unrecognizable, eyes glossy, lips trembling, and a faint red mark on my collarbone where I had absently scratched in my nervousness. The bed was cold when I finally crawled into it. The scent of his cologne lingered on the pillows, a cruel reminder of what should have been. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to take me, to drown the ache that was quickly consuming me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. When I opened my eyes, the faint light of dawn seeped through the curtains. My heart sank as I realized the other side of the bed was still empty. His absence was no longer just an annoyance. It had become a weight pressing down on my chest, making every breath shallow and painful. I reached for my phone, hoping for a message, a call, anything to explain why he hadn't come home. Nothing. My fingers hovered over the screen, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. Should I call him? Should I text? Would I seem desperate? Weak? The rational part of me told me to wait, but the gnawing ache in my stomach screamed for answers. Finally, I dialed his number. Each ring felt like an eternity, a reminder of how alone I was in that moment. The call went to voicemail, again and again. I threw the phone onto the bed, frustration boiling into something uglier, something I wasn't ready to name. The morning felt hollow, the faint chirping of birds outside a cruel juxtaposition to the chaos inside me. Where was he? Why hadn't he called? And why, no matter how much I tried to reason with myself, did I feel like I was no longer his priority? My mind spiraled, replaying every interaction from the past few weeks, every subtle change in his tone, every moment he'd seemed distracted. The pieces began to form a picture I wasn't ready to see. By the time the sun fully rose, I was still in bed, staring at the ceiling. The man I thought I knew, the man I thought would always choose me, had left me alone on our anniversary. And for the first time, the warmth of his love, once my safe haven, felt like a distant memory, cold, unfamiliar, and slowly slipping away. I still remember the first time I saw him, as vividly as if it were yesterday. It was one of those moments you don't see coming, one that sneaks up on you when you're least prepared. I wasn't looking for anything, least of all love. My life back then was steady, almost boring in its predictability. Work, coffee dates with friends, evenings curled up with a book. It wasn't exciting, but it was safe. And then he walked in and turned my world upside down. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the clouds hang so low they feel like they might touch your head. I ducked into a small cafe to escape the downpour, shaking the droplets off my coat as I found a seat by the window. I remember staring out at the rain-soaked streets, lost in thought, when I heard his voice. Deep, warm, and confident, it cut through the chatter of the cafe like a melody I didn't know I'd been waiting for. He was ordering coffee, something complicated that made the barista raise an eyebrow. I glanced over out of curiosity, and for a moment, it felt like the entire room froze. He was tall, with an effortless charm that seemed to draw people in. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and his smile, oh, that smile, was the kind that could make you forget how to breathe. When our eyes met, something inside me shifted. It wasn't love at first sight, not exactly, but it was something close. A spark, a pull, as if the universe had conspired to bring us to that exact moment. I quickly looked away, pretending to be engrossed in my book, but my heart was racing. I told myself it was silly, that he was just another stranger passing through my day, but deep down, I knew better. To my surprise, he didn't just leave with his coffee. He walked straight to my table, his steps confident but unhurried, like he knew he belonged there. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from me. For a second, I forgot how to speak. "No, go ahead," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. He sat down, setting his cup on the table. "I'm Alex," he said, extending his hand. "Emily," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, his touch sending a shiver up my spine. From that moment, everything felt effortless. We talked for hours, our words flowing like a river that had finally found its course. He asked about my favorite books, my dreams, my fears, and I found myself sharing things I hadn't told anyone else. There was something about him that made me feel seen, like he wasn't just hearing my words, but truly understanding them. By the time the rain stopped, I didn't want him to leave. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him without hesitation, my usual caution forgotten in the warmth of his presence. As he walked away, I felt an ache in my chest, a longing I couldn't explain. The days that followed were a whirlwind. He called me the next morning, his voice bright and teasing. "So, is it too soon to ask you out?" he joked, and I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Our first date was magical, the kind of night that feels like a scene from a movie. We walked along the river, the city lights reflecting on the water, and he held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. With Alex, everything felt easy. He had a way of making the ordinary extraordinary, turning mundane moments into cherished memories. He'd surprise me with flowers for no reason, take me to hidden spots in the city I'd never seen before, and listen to my stories like they were the most fascinating tales he'd ever heard. I fell for him quickly, maybe too quickly. But how could I not? He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. With him, I felt like I could be myself, flaws, insecurities, and all. He didn't just love me, he made me love myself more. When he proposed a year later, it felt like the culmination of a fairy tale. It wasn't a grand gesture, no flash mobs or fireworks, just the two of us on a quiet beach, the waves whispering against the shore. He knelt in the sand, his eyes shining with a mix of nerves and love, and asked me to spend forever with him. "Forever," I'd said, my voice trembling with joy as I slipped the ring onto my finger. And in that moment, I believed it. I believed in him, in us, in the promises we made under the fading light of the setting sun. Looking back now, I wonder if I was blind or simply naive. Maybe I saw the cracks even then, but chose to ignore them, too caught up in the dream to notice the flaws. Or maybe he was just that good at hiding them. Either way, I gave him my heart, trusting him to keep it safe. And for a while, he did. But as I sit here now, replaying those memories in my mind, I can't help but feel a pang of bitterness. What happened to the man who made me believe in love? The man who promised me forever? Did he ever really exist? Or was he just a figment of my imagination, a mirage that vanished the moment I reached for it? The first time the thought crossed my mind, I brushed it away, ashamed of even entertaining such a notion. Alex wasn't the kind of man who would betray me, Or at least, that's what I told myself. But doubts have a way of creeping in, settling into the quiet corners of your mind, waiting for moments of vulnerability to take root and grow. It started with little things, the kind of things you might not notice unless you're looking for them. He began working late more often than usual, his explanations vague and hurried. "The project is taking longer than expected," he'd say, avoiding my eyes as he slipped out the door. Or, "You know how demanding my boss is," followed by a kiss on my forehead that felt more like a distraction than an act of affection. At first, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He'd always been ambitious, dedicated to his work. But then there were the missed calls, the text messages left unanswered for hours, and the way he seemed distant, even when he was home. He'd sit on the couch, scrolling through his phone with a faint smile that wasn't meant for me. When I asked what was so amusing, he'd shrug it off. "Just a meme," he'd say, or "work chat," before locking his screen and putting the phone face down on the table. That's when the nagging feeling began. It wasn't jealousy, not at first. It was confusion, a sense that something had shifted between us, like a once sturdy bridge now creaking under an unseen weight. I started paying closer attention, noticing the way he'd excuse himself to take calls in another room, or how his phone seemed to be glued to his hand, even during dinner. One evening, I worked up the courage to ask him about it. "You've been so busy lately," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Is everything okay?" He looked up from his plate, his brow furrowing. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" "I don't know," I said, hesitating. "You just seem distracted." His expression softened, and he reached across the table to take my hand. "I'm sorry, Em. Work's been crazy, and I guess I've been a bit out of it. But I promise, it's nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe him. His words were soothing, his touch reassuring. But there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place, that kept me from feeling fully at ease. The doubts grew stronger after that. He started coming home smelling of perfume, a scent that wasn't mine. When I asked about it, he laughed it off. "One of the interns at work is always spraying that stuff," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's impossible to avoid." Then there were the mysterious errands. He'd leave the house on weekends, saying he needed to run to the store or pick up something for work, only to return hours later with flimsy explanations. Once, I offered to go with him, but he quickly declined. "It's boring stuff," he said, forcing a smile. "You'd hate it." I tried to rationalize it, telling myself I was overthinking, that I was letting my insecurities get the better of me. But the signs kept piling up, and with each one, my faith in him cracked a little more. One night, while he was in the shower, I found myself staring at his phone on the bedside table. My heart pounded as I reached for it, my hands trembling. I'd never snooped on him before, never felt the need to. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers I needed were just a few taps away. The phone was locked, of course. I set it down quickly, ashamed of myself for even trying. When he came out of the bathroom, I forced a smile and pretended everything was fine. But inside, I was unraveling. The breaking point came during a dinner with friends. We were sitting at the table, laughing and sharing stories, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and for a split second, I saw his expression change. It was subtle, a flicker of something between panic and guilt, but it was enough. He excused himself, taking the call outside while the rest of us exchanged awkward glances. When he returned, he was all smiles, brushing off my questions with a quick, "Just work stuff." But the damage was done. That flicker, that momentary crack in his facade, confirmed what I had been too afraid to admit. Something was wrong. Later that night, I confronted him. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Em, you're overthinking this. It was just a work call." "You keep saying that," I said, my voice rising. "But it's always work, always some excuse. Do you even realize how distant you've been?" He looked at me, his expression a mix of frustration and exhaustion. "I don't know what you want me to say. I'm doing my best here, Emily. I'm trying to balance everything, but you're making it impossible." His words stung, but it was the way he said my name, cold and detached, that hurt the most. Emily. Not M, not the affectionate nickname he'd always used. Just Emily, as if I were a stranger. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling as he slept. My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. Was he lying to me? Was I imagining things? Or was I finally seeing the truth I'd been too blind to acknowledge? The next morning, he kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, his smile as charming as ever. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the man I loved was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. It happened on a Wednesday, a day so ordinary it gave no warning of the storm about to shatter my world. I had just finished work and decided to stop by the florist on the way home. The roses were blooming beautifully that week, and despite everything, I wanted to bring a bit of warmth back into the house. Maybe it was foolish, but I still believed that we could fix whatever was broken between us, if only I tried harder. I walked through the door, balancing the bouquet in one hand and my bag in the other, calling out his name as I kicked off my shoes. Silence greeted me, thick and heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. His car was in the driveway, so I knew he was home. I set the roses on the kitchen counter, their delicate fragrance doing little to ease the growing tension in my chest. "Alex?" I called again, making my way toward the bedroom. The door was ajar, and I could hear muffled voices coming from inside. My heart stopped. For a moment, I froze, my mind scrambling for an explanation. Maybe he was on the phone, I told myself, or watching a video. Anything but the alternative that was clawing at the edges of my mind. I pushed the door open slightly, just enough to see inside, and there they were, Alex and a woman, tangled in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. My breath caught in my throat, and the world seemed to tilt. The bouquet slipped from my hand, the roses scattering across the floor, their petals bruised and broken. The sound startled them, and Alex turned, his face paling as he saw me standing there. The woman turned too, and that's when the second blow came. It wasn't just anyone. It was her, my sister. "Emily, wait!" Alex started, scrambling to his feet, but I was already backing away, my chest heaving as the betrayal sunk in. My sister, my own flesh and blood. She had been my confidant, the person I turned to when I needed advice or comfort. And now, she was the one tearing my life apart. "How could you?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and despair. My sister looked away, shame, or was it guilt, flickering across her face. But Alex, he didn't look ashamed. He looked terrified, as if he were more concerned about what this would mean for him than for me. "It's not what it looks like," he said, stepping closer. "Don't you dare!" I spat, my voice rising. "Don't you dare insult me by lying. I saw you, Alex. I saw you, and her." I turned to my sister, my hands trembling. "How could you do this to me? After everything? Why?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she stood there, looking small and pathetic, while I stood at the center of the wreckage they had created. The anger bubbled up inside me, hot and uncontrollable, drowning out the pain. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking. "Both of you." I didn't wait for their excuses. I turned and stormed out of the room, my vision blurred by tears. I needed to get out of there, away from the suffocating weight of betrayal. I grabbed a suitcase from the hall closet and began throwing my belongings into it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it shut. Alex followed me, his voice pleading. "Emily, please, let's talk about this. It was a mistake. I swear, it didn't mean anything." I whirled around to face him, the suitcase in my hand. "A mistake? You call destroying my life a mistake?" My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "You didn't just cheat on me, Alex. You betrayed me in the worst way possible, with my sister." He reached for me, but I stepped back, clutching the suitcase like a shield. "Don't touch me," I hissed. "You've done enough." I made my way to the door, pausing only to grab the keys to my car. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air hit my face, a stark contrast to the heat of my anger. I felt like I was in a daze, my body moving on autopilot as I threw the suitcase into the trunk and climbed into the driver's seat. Before I drove off, I looked back at the house one last time. Alex was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of regret. My sister was nowhere to be seen, and for that, I was grateful. I didn't think I could bear the sight of her. As I drove away, the tears came, hot and uncontrollable. My chest heaved with sobs, the pain cutting through me like a knife. I had lost everything in the span of a few minutes: my husband, my sister, my sense of security. The life I had built, the dreams I had cherished, were gone. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't stay. I needed to get as far away as possible, to put as much distance between me and the people who had shattered my heart. The road stretched out before me, dark and endless, a reflection of the emptiness I felt inside. As the city lights faded into the distance, I realized that I wasn't just leaving a house behind. I was leaving behind a part of myself, the part that had believed in love, trust, and forever. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, despair. Each breath felt heavier than the last, my mind unable to quiet itself, endlessly replaying the scene of Alex and my sister. I spent hours pacing the small apartment I'd rented in a rush, my thoughts a chaotic storm. I had left the house, left them, but the weight of what they had done still clung to me like a shroud. I needed answers, needed closure, or maybe I just needed to release the fire that had been building inside me since that night. It was a week later when I finally picked up the phone and dialed my sister's number. My hands shook as I waited for her to answer, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and dread. When she finally picked up, her voice was cautious, barely above a whisper. "Emily," she began, but I didn't let her finish. "Don't you dare say my name," I snapped, my voice trembling with fury. "You don't get to talk to me like we're still sisters, not after what you did." There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said weakly. "It just happened." "Don't insult me with your pathetic excuses," I spat. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You slept with my husband, Rebecca. You destroyed my marriage, my life, and for what? Some cheap thrill?" Her silence only fueled my anger. "You were supposed to have my back," I continued, my voice rising. "You were supposed to be my family, and instead, you stabbed me in the back. Do you even feel guilty? Or is this just another game for you?" "I love him," she said suddenly, her voice steady and firm. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air out of my lungs. "We love each other, Emily." My grip on the phone tightened, and I felt my nails digging into my palm. "You what?" I hissed, the disbelief and anger surging through me like a tidal wave. "I'm pregnant," she said softly, almost as if she were trying to shield me from the impact of her words. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment, the world around me seemed to stop. Her words echoed in my mind, each one a sharp dagger twisting deeper into my chest. Pregnant. She was carrying his child. The thought made me feel physically ill. "You disgust me," I finally managed to say, my voice shaking with raw emotion. "Both of you. You're nothing but selfish, deceitful monsters. And I hope, no, I pray, you both get exactly what you deserve." Before she could respond, I ended the call, my hand trembling as I set the phone down. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I didn't want to cry for them anymore. They weren't worth it. Instead, I let the anger consume me, focusing on the one thing I could control, holding them accountable for their betrayal. That's when I remembered something Alex had said months ago about needing access to my bank account, just in case. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. After all, he was my husband. I had trusted him. But now, that trust was long gone. I opened my banking app, my heart racing as I scrolled through the transactions. My stomach dropped when I saw the withdrawals. Thousands of dollars, taken over the course of months. Money I had saved for emergencies, for our future, gone. The betrayal burned anew, the sheer audacity of his actions sending a fresh wave of fury through me. He hadn't just stolen my heart, he had stolen my money too. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number, my hands shaking with rage. He answered after a few rings, his voice calm and composed, as if he weren't the villain in my story. "Emily," he said, his tone almost casual. "I didn't expect to hear from you." "Cut the act," I snapped. "I know what you did, Alex. You've been stealing money from my account. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" There was a pause, and then he sighed. "I didn't steal it," he said, his voice annoyingly calm. "We're married, Emily. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." "Don't you dare use that against me," I hissed. "You lied to me, cheated on me, and now you've stolen from me. I want that money back, Alex. Every last cent." "Emily, be reasonable," he said, his tone shifting to one of condescension. "You left, remember? You walked away from everything. I had to take care of things on my own." "Don't you dare try to justify this," I snapped. "You're a thief and a liar. You don't get to play the victim here." His voice grew colder. "You're not getting it back. You left me, Emily. You left the house, the life we built together. And now you're expecting me to just hand over money? It doesn't work that way." I felt my blood boil, my vision blurring with rage. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking. "You destroyed everything, Alex. Everything. And now you're trying to punish me for your mistakes? You're a coward." "Believe what you want," he said, his tone dismissive. "But I'm done with this conversation. Goodbye, Emily." The line went dead, leaving me alone with my anger and the crushing weight of his betrayal. I threw the phone onto the couch, a scream of frustration escaping my lips. He had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my money, and left me with nothing but broken pieces. But as I stood there, the fire inside me began to shift. I realized that I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to let him take any more from me. If he thought I was going to back down, he was sorely mistaken. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. It had been weeks since my last confrontation with Alex, and in that time, I had descended into a void of solitude and self-reflection. The anger that had once burned so brightly within me had dulled, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. I wasn't going to let him get away with what he had done. He had stolen not just my love, but my trust, my dignity, and my money. And he needed to pay for that, literally and figuratively. Sitting in my new apartment, I stared at the police station's number saved on my phone. My finger hovered over the call button, my heart pounding. Would they even believe me? Would they take my story seriously? I wasn't sure, but I couldn't let my doubts paralyze me any longer. I took a deep breath and pressed the button. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. I explained the situation as succinctly as I could, my voice shaking at first, but gaining strength as I laid out the details of Alex's betrayal and theft. The officer listened patiently, asking me to come in and provide a formal statement. When I arrived at the station, the weight of the moment hit me. The sterile smell of the building, the distant chatter of officers, it all felt surreal. I was directed to a small interview room where a man was waiting. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a sharp, clean-cut appearance. His dark eyes studied me as I entered, his expression neutral but attentive. "Miss Carter?" he asked, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, steadying. "I'm Detective Mark Evans. I'll be handling your case." There was something reassuring about his presence, something that made me feel like I wasn't entirely alone in this. As I began to recount my story, the words tumbled out faster than I expected. I told him everything, how Alex had betrayed me with my sister, how I'd discovered the withdrawals from my account, and how he had refused to return the money. I even showed him the evidence I'd gathered: bank statements, text messages, and a record of the confrontation we'd had. Detective Evans listened intently, nodding occasionally as he took notes. His gaze was sharp, but there was a kindness in his demeanor that put me at ease. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You've provided a strong case," he said finally. "We'll investigate further, but based on what you've shared, there's enough here to take action." Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that justice might actually be served. The next few days passed in a blur as Detective Evans and his team dug into Alex's activities. They uncovered more than I had anticipated, evidence of not just theft, but fraud, as Alex had been using my account to cover personal expenses under false pretenses. It was a web of deceit that stretched further than I'd imagined, and when the day came for his arrest, I felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow. I wasn't there to witness the moment, but Detective Evans called me shortly afterward. "We've taken him into custody," he said. "He'll be charged with multiple counts of fraud and theft." "What happens now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There will be a court process," he explained, "but given the evidence, he'll likely face prison time, and you'll be compensated for the money he took." Compensation. The word felt hollow compared to the emotional toll this had taken on me, but it was a start. When the formalities were over, I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time. Alex was out of my life for good, and though the pain of his betrayal still lingered, I felt a sense of closure beginning to take root. In the weeks that followed, Detective Evans remained a constant presence in my life. At first, it was strictly professional, updates on the case, discussions about court proceedings, but as time went on, our conversations grew more personal. I learned that he had been divorced for a few years and was raising a young daughter on his own. There was a warmth to him, a quiet strength that I found myself drawn to. One evening, after the case had been wrapped up and Alex had been sentenced to several years in prison, Mark called me. "I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee sometime," he said, his tone hesitant but hopeful. I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. After everything I'd been through, the idea of letting someone new into my life felt daunting. But there was something about Mark that made me want to take the risk. "I'd like that," I said finally, a small smile tugging at my lips. Our coffee date turned into a dinner date, and then another. With Mark, things felt different, easy, honest, and grounded in mutual respect. He didn't try to rush me or fix me. He simply listened, offering quiet support as I worked through my pain. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again, like I could move forward without the weight of the past holding me back. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset, Mark took my hand in his. "You've been through so much, Emily," he said softly, "but you're stronger than you realize, and if you'll let me, I'd like to be there for whatever comes next." His words brought tears to my eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of sorrow. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace, a glimmer of hope for a new beginning. And as I looked at Mark, his eyes steady and sincere, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could trust again. It was a crisp morning when my sister showed up at my doorstep, her presence an unwelcome shadow over the fragile peace I had been trying to build. Mark had stayed the night, his steadying presence a source of comfort as I navigated the emotional wreckage Alex had left behind. But seeing Rebecca standing there, her face twisted with anger and something close to desperation, reignited the storm inside me. "Emily," she spat, her voice sharp and venomous, "you've ruined everything. How could you do this to us? Do you even know what you've done?" I stepped outside, closing the door behind me to shield Mark from the spectacle that was about to unfold. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my chest tightening as I faced her. "What I've done?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're the one who destroyed everything, Rebecca. You and Alex. Don't you dare try to make me the villain here." "You had him arrested!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You've taken away my child's father. How could you be so cruel?" "Cruel?" I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and sharp. "You call me cruel after what you did? You slept with my husband, Rebecca. You betrayed me in every way possible, and now you want to play the victim? You've got some nerve." Her face contorted with fury, her hands shaking at her sides. "You're selfish," she hissed. "You always have been. This isn't just about you, Emily. Alex and I didn't let her finish. "Don't," I said, my voice low and firm. "Don't you dare say you love him. Whatever you two had, it was built on lies and betrayal, and now you're paying the price for it. That's not my fault." Before she could respond, the door opened and Mark stepped out onto the porch. His presence was immediate and commanding, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around us. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch grounding me. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice steady, but with an edge that made it clear he wouldn't tolerate any more drama. Rebecca's eyes flicked to him, her anger faltering for a moment. "Who are you?" she demanded, her tone accusatory. "I'm Mark," he said simply, his gaze unwavering. "Emily's partner, and I think it's time for you to leave." "Partner?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "So this is what you do? You ruin my life and move on like nothing happened?" "You ruined your own life," Mark said calmly, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "And Emily has every right to move on. Now, unless you have something constructive to say, I suggest you leave before I call the authorities." Rebecca's face flushed with anger, but she said nothing. She cast one last glare in my direction before turning on her heel and storming off. I watched her go, my heart pounding, a mix of anger and sadness swirling within me. She had once been my sister, my confidant, but now she was just another reminder of everything I had lost. Mark turned to me, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my chest felt heavy. "I will be," I said quietly. "Thanks to you." In the weeks that followed, Mark and I began to plan our future together. It wasn't a rushed decision. We had taken our time, letting our relationship grow naturally. But after everything that had happened, I knew I needed a fresh start. A new chapter where Alex and Rebecca were nothing but distant memories. We decided to move to a small town a few hours away, a place where the air was cleaner, the streets quieter, and the pace of life slower. Mark found a position at the local police department, and I started looking into opportunities to restart my career. The idea of building something new, something just for us, filled me with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. The day we moved in, I found myself standing in the middle of our new living room, a box of dishes in my hands and a smile on my face. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. Mark came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he said softly. I leaned into him, closing my eyes. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It really does." A few weeks after we settled in, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, and my heart sank as I held it in my hands. It was from Alex. I stared at it for a long time, the weight of it heavy in my palm. Part of me wanted to rip it open, to see what excuses or apologies he had to offer. But another part of me, the part that had fought so hard to move on, knew that nothing he could say would change what he had done. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter still unopened. Mark walked in, pausing when he saw the expression on my face. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's from Alex," I said quietly, holding up the envelope. Mark's eyes darkened slightly, but he said nothing, waiting for me to decide what to do. After a moment, I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked to the trash can. Without a second thought, I dropped the letter inside and closed the lid. "I don't need his apologies," I said, turning to face Mark. "They won't change anything. I'm done with him." Mark smiled, a soft, proud smile that made my heart swell. "Good," he said, "because you deserve better than anything he could offer." As I stood there, looking at the man who had helped me rebuild my life, I realized that he was right. I didn't need Alex's apologies or Rebecca's regret. I didn't need to dwell on the past anymore. I had found something better, something real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The years that followed felt like a dream, the kind I never thought I'd have after everything that had happened. Moving to the small town with Mark was the beginning of a new chapter, a life I'd never imagined, but now couldn't picture being without. The scars Alex and Rebecca left behind were still there, but they had faded, reminders of a time that had shaped me, but no longer defined me. Our new home was nothing grand, but it was ours. A cozy little house with a garden out back where we spent countless evenings planting flowers and vegetables. I had never been one for gardening, but with Mark's encouragement, I found it surprisingly therapeutic. Each bloom felt like a tiny triumph, a symbol of how far I'd come. Mark's daughter, Lily, became an unexpected source of joy in my life. When we first met, she was hesitant, unsure of me and my place in her father's world. But over time, as we baked cookies in the kitchen and worked on art projects at the dining table, she began to warm up to me. The first time she called me Em, my heart swelled, and I knew I was becoming part of her life in a way that felt natural and right. Mark and I didn't rush into anything, taking our time to let our relationship grow. But as the months turned into years, it became clear that we were building something lasting. He proposed on a quiet evening in the garden, the setting sun casting a warm glow over us. There were no grand gestures, no elaborate speeches, just a simple, heartfelt question that I answered with tears of joy and a resounding yes. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair. Close friends and a few family members gathered in a quaint chapel surrounded by blooming wildflowers. Lily walked down the aisle as our flower girl, her smile brighter than the sun. As I stood there, looking into Mark's eyes, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. He was my partner, my safe haven, and my future. Saying I do felt like stepping fully into the life I had fought so hard to rebuild. After the wedding, life settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. I started a small business, something I had always dreamed of but never had the courage to pursue. It was nothing extravagant, just a cozy little boutique that sold handmade crafts and local goods, but it quickly became a cornerstone of the community. People would stop by not just to shop, but to chat, to share stories, to connect. It gave me a sense of purpose and belonging that I hadn't realized I needed. Mark continued his work at the local police department, his dedication and kindness earning him respect from everyone he met. Watching him thrive in his role was a source of pride for me, but it was his devotion to Lily and our growing family that truly melted my heart. Yes, our family was growing. A year after the wedding, I found out I was pregnant. The news came as a surprise, but it was a welcome one. Mark was over the moon, and Lily couldn't contain her excitement at the thought of being a big sister. The pregnancy wasn't without its challenges, but Mark was by my side every step of the way, holding my hand through every appointment, every restless night, every moment of doubt. When our son, Ethan, was born, it felt like the final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Holding him in my arms for the first time, I felt a love so overwhelming it brought tears to my eyes. Mark stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his own eyes glistening with emotion. "He's perfect," he whispered, and I couldn't agree more. As the years passed, our little family flourished. Lily and Ethan became inseparable, their laughter filling the house with a warmth that made every hardship worth it. Our days were filled with the simple joys of life: family dinners, movie nights, trips to the park. It wasn't always perfect, of course. There were arguments and challenges, moments of doubt and frustration. But through it all, we faced everything together, a team united by love and trust. There were moments when the past tried to creep back in, when memories of Alex and Rebecca threatened to cloud my happiness. But each time, I reminded myself of how far I'd come, of the life I had built with Mark and our children. Those memories no longer held power over me. They were simply part of my story, chapters that had led me to this beautiful present. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mark took my hand in his. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked softly, his thumb brushing against my knuckles. I knew what he meant without needing clarification. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not in the way I used to. It doesn't hurt anymore. If anything, it reminds me of how strong I am, of how strong we are." He smiled, leaning over to press a kiss to my forehead. "You amaze me, you know that?" I laughed, a soft, contented sound. "I'm just me," I said. "But thank you for always reminding me that just me is enough." As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, I looked out at the life we had built together. It wasn't the life I had envisioned all those years ago, but it was better in every way that mattered. It was real, grounded in love and trust and the quiet strength that comes from weathering life's storms. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was truly, completely happy. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities.